I guess good morning again. Whenever I'm up here, I say good morning twice. But no, but as I always say, I'm happy to be here in front of everyone to share God's word for another week. And the songs we played actually lined up somewhat to what I was wanting to talk on a bit. And the topic I'm going to center around for my message is essentially peace. And I don't remember what exactly it was that I thought of in the moment, but about probably 3-4 weeks ago, I came up with this topic for my sermon. And I was sitting out on the back part of the house and I don't even remember what it was I was thinking about, but the thought crossed my mind that money essentially is a form of peace to a degree. Not to a degree, it is. It's a form of worldly peace. And that thought led me to think of another example of worldly peace and another example of worldly peace. And then it led me to think of temptations, and then it led me to think of something else. And how there's a lot of things in life that can provide us with a form of peace, temporary peace, worldly peace. And I have a small list here, and I'll kind of give an example of what each of those things might be and how they would represent peace. Some are good examples, others could be perhaps, examples that might make us, look in the mirror a little bit. But, and these are in no particular order. These are just as they were in my notes. But people can look for peace in a relationship. That can be a friendship. It can be a romantic relationship. My friend one time back when I was at Greenville, we were talking about things. This was before he'd gotten married. I stayed at his house quite a bit. And I think I forget exactly how it went down, but we were talking about fitness and physical fitness and looking attractive for a potential partner. And he goes, well, Sam, just because you're going to get married, or just because a person gets married doesn't mean that your self-conscious nature about, maybe looking good or bad goes away. You still have that self-conscious nature. And I was like, interesting. So a relationship may, yes, provide us with peace, but down the road, that doesn't necessarily take care of all of our problems. We might still be self-conscious, have issues. Money, as I said, that's a form of peace. Money comes and goes, though. That we might have a job that gives us good income and such. However, that doesn't mean that will last for forever. And sometimes even money can lead us to doing something we shouldn't be doing. Success, that kind of goes along with money, but that could be success in maybe a sport or in school. We think real good about ourselves. We're doing this. Maybe we don't need God's help because we studied for that test and did it all on our own. That's not necessarily the case. That's a temporary form of peace. And now this is kind of where we get a little bit more, I guess you could say, not controversial, but for some people, not here necessarily, but for some people, this could really hit close to home. I think of the peace that perhaps the alcoholic finds in resorting to alcohol. That's a form of peace that person is seeking. It's a temporary peace. Same thing goes for drugs, entertainment, social media even. You might get a lot of likes on a post, but what does that really mean? I'll never forget when I posted my first Instagram photo that had 100 likes. I'm like, oh, I'm real special, but I don't even remember which one it was now. But as we go through these things, I want you to think about things in your life or things maybe you've witnessed in other people's lives that they've resorted to as their form of peace. And so we were talking about money, and I was thinking of different Bible stories that perhaps where people have been deceived by what appears to be a peaceful resort in life, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it was. There are many powerful ones, and the first one we're going to talk about is Judas. If you can pull up the reference I have, Paul, of Matthew 26. Then one of the 12, called Judas Iscariot, went unto the chief priests, and said unto them, What will ye give me, and I will deliver him unto you? And they covenanted with him for 30 pieces of silver. And from that time he sought opportunity to betray him. So one might say that this is the strongest example in the Bible of peace, or it being the wrong thing. Judas sought peace in that money that he was getting, and he betrayed Jesus. And so perhaps the topic of peace with Judas isn't really touched on a lot, but what I'm drawing from this is there was something that was put before God, and it was money. And that was something that I think that maybe in our lives we all have made a mistake with a few times. That could be maybe we all haven't done it, but I'm saying that is something that we've been tempted with. A monetary example could be maybe we are presented with the chance to do a job or to get a job or maybe to do something for someone, maybe sell something or purchase something, but we have maybe a guilty conscience about it. Why is it that we have that guilty conscience about that? Maybe that source of money that we're getting isn't necessarily from a godly source. Maybe we're doing something that we shouldn't do to get that money. And Judas in this example, as we all know as Christians, led to Jesus being crucified, arrested, and dying on the cross. Now, this was part of the story in the Bible that ultimately leads to our redemption, Jesus rising from the dead. But may we never have an example where we are like Judas in our lives. So money can buy possessions, it can buy comfort, convenience, but it cannot give us forgiveness. It cannot give us true everlasting joy, and it cannot give us ultimately peace. And the money was left behind, and Judas killed himself. So that is where that got Judas. Another one here where we might think that we are in a position, or this person might have thought that he was in a position of worldly peace, but he was not at all. And he looked in the end of it all and said that it was not worth it. So as I read this example, I want you to think to yourself about maybe something that you, and I hold no fault to you. I have my own examples. But think of something that you thought would provide you with peace in life. It really would. You thought it was going to be everything. Maybe looking back, you realize that was silly, so you don't think that now, perhaps. But in the moment, you knew that this was going to be what you needed in life. So I'm going to give the story of Solomon, the man who had everything. So if you pull up Ecclesiastes, please, Paul. Chapter 2, verse 1 through 11. Yes. So we have a few verses here. I'll go ahead and read through them all. I said in mine heart, go to now, I will prove thee with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure, and behold, this also is vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of mirth, what doeth it? I sought in mine heart to give myself unto wine, yet acquainting my heart with wisdom, and to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was that good for the sons of men, which they should do under the heaven all the days of their life. I made me great works, I builded me houses, planted me vineyards, I made me gardens and orchards, and I planted trees in them of all kinds of fruits. And this is just a list of all the things he's done. I made me pools of water to water therewith the wood that bringeth forth trees. I got me servants and maidens, and had servants born in my house. Also I had great possessions, and great and small cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. And it just keeps going and going. I gathered me also silver and gold, the treasures of kings and provinces, and I'm paraphrasing here, men singers and women singers, and the delights of sons of men, musical instruments, all of the sorts. So I was great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. And this is the part that kind of hits the strongest. And whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not my heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Then I looked into all the works that my hands had wrought, all the works that he had done. Then I looked into it, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. So, as we think about that, maybe we've had something that we've really strived, or that we really have strove to, however you say that word. Yeah, striven, there we go. All right, well, whatever. We had a good goal that we set ourselves towards, and we achieved it. But internally, do we feel that much different in terms of our soul being given what we need? Maybe so. Maybe it was something you did with the church. If so, that's wonderful. I'm not saying that it can't be. I'm just saying it's important that we think about what those things are. And I have another example here, or a couple more. And I wasn't really worried about length or such with this sermon, because really what I wanted to focus on was the point of it that I had. And I want you guys, if you haven't yet, to have that same epiphany I had. And before I give this, I have a couple more ones here. Yeah, actually, Paul, bring up Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 10. This is what I kind of had my realization about when I was sitting there on my back porch that day, or in the backyard. And it really was a lot of people in life, what it is at the end of the day that they are searching is peace. And you have to ask yourself, what does peace really mean to you? And if you think deeply enough about that question, it will ultimately be an answer that has to do with God's peace. Because each answer you will come up with answers along the way, but if you think deeper into that answer, such as the ones I gave, money, relationship, hobbies, entertainment, whatever it might be, organizations that you might be a part of, they won't last forever. So at some point in time, that peace will not last anymore. And that was the realization that I had. Perhaps you guys, like I said, have had that realization, but it just really hit me hard that day. And there's different types of worldly peace that I did not list in there, so that list is not exhausted. But one that I think that can also be misunderstood is the peace and freedom. What exactly is freedom? And I didn't really know how to answer that. But as I was looking through different stories and different examples of what I could give as I carry on with this, I've talked on the prodigal son several times. I've referenced it. But I think that there's so many different lessons you can take from that story, it's unreal. We actually, and I've said this before, we had a book that we did my sophomore year in college that the baseball team read, and I think it was called The Prodigal. I have the book in my room in the shelf, but it was on all the various different ways you can perceive that story, and you can perceive it from realizing, oh, I went the wrong direction. I was at the lowest of low, and I came back. But I take it from he simply wanted to go off on his own. He wanted to be free of anything that was tying him down. He had his inheritance ahead of when he normally would have gotten it, and he had everything that he thought he needed. He had that freedom, and he was at peace with himself when he left. But after he left, slowly that peace went away. And so if you look on Luke, my mother would say that I love my food. She would say that, and so would my dad probably. And as I read this message, I think to myself, what would it take for me to want this? But if you look at Luke chapter 15, verses, specifically Paul, verses 16 and 17. Thank you. And he would fain have filled his belly with the husks that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. And when he came to himself, he said, I should have read from here. And he came to himself. He said, how many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? And as I read the line about the swine and how he wished he could eat with the swine, first picture that comes into my mind is the scraps that we give to the cats and the dogs. They're scraps because we don't want to eat them, but he would have probably wanted to eat those scraps. So a temporary peace that gave him everything he wanted, or everything he thought he wanted, led to his destruction, to where he was below the servants of his father. So there's just so much that you can take from that. And so I was thinking then, as I was getting this ready, as we look at peace and as we look at areas of our life that we have successfully achieved peace, even if it was temporary, we still can, as long as it was for good reasons and backed by God, we can celebrate those small achievements of peace. I'm not saying you can't. In many cases, they might be very valid. It might be paying off your home. Paying off your home is a big deal. That means that you own your home, aside from property taxes, of course. But that's a thing to celebrate. Now, that home won't last forever. The wood might rot. A tornado might come through. Just because you have that doesn't mean it'll be there forever. But that's just an example. But what is it that will give us that everlasting peace? And that is Jesus Christ. So, Paul, bring up the next one I have, John chapter 4. So, I'll let you guys conclude where this story comes from. Jesus answered and said unto her, whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again, worldly water. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst, but the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. That is the story with Jesus, with the woman at the well. And he essentially showed her that through him and through living water, she will have all the peace she needs in her life. She was not a woman of peace. She was not. She was a woman who had problems. She was seeking something, and that is what ultimately led her to God, or to Jesus, and to meet with Jesus. Bring up John 14, 16 through 18. And I will pray the Father, and he shall give you another comforter, that he may abide with you forever. Even the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it seeth him not, neither knoweth him. But ye know him, for he dwelleth with you, and shall be in you. I will not leave you comfortless, I will come to you. So this verse in itself says that God will be with us. He is with us. So it's us limiting him from being with us, which is ultimately holding us back. So the peace that we are seeking is within us. We are the ones holding it back, and almost an unintentional self-destruct, you could say, really, or self-sabotage, not destruct, but sabotage. But that was really the main point of that there, and I hope that you guys received it the way I wanted you to, because there's lots of problems that we can run into in life, and they are real problems. They really are, and there are reasons that peace is removed from us. But since God's peace never ends, that means we can always resort to it. Even if we lose our peace for a moment, we know where we can re-get that peace. And as I kind of not conclude, but as I draw that summary together, I wanted to touch on something else that a good friend of mine said just this past week, and he said it as a joke. He actually said it in reference to. Well, actually, I'm not going to say what he said it in reference to because it wasn't bad, but it might sound silly. But we were referencing just how people don't take care of themselves in life, and it was regarding some fitness and also just bad food choices, whatever. But the thing we were talking about was just thinking, oh, I don't need to do anything, everything's fine, I'll live as I live, and so on. And the phrase he said was, Jesus Christ did, how did he say it? I told you this quote, I'm forgetting exactly how he said it, but he said, Jesus' life was not a life of overwhelming comfort. Why should we expect the same in our own lives? And I'm like, what? Like, what was that comment? And then I thought about it, and I'm like, well, you're right. Jesus' life was not necessarily the easiest. We read the stories in the Bible, but I never thought of it from that human perspective of what it was, did Jesus have an easy life? And I wrote down this list of some of the things that proved that Jesus' life was actually not easy in any sense. We think of it as the end of the story, the point of the story, but we don't really think about the individual experiences, and we might have thrown our hands up in the air like, what on earth is this? But he was born in a stable. We all have referenced that point. I mean, that's a big one there. He was born in a stable. But ultimately, his family was running. They were refugees. That was not an easy experience. He was not wealthy. He was raised in poverty. That's something that most of us have been able to not have to really run into too heavily. He was not accepted in his hometown. I was born and raised in Staunton, but I'm still here, so I have it easier than Jesus in that respect. Constantly criticized by religious leaders, which, granted, there's a lot of disagreements with religion, so that is something that does exist today. He was betrayed by a friend. He was betrayed by Judas. I mean, we think, oh, everything's terrible. I've been betrayed by my best friend. Well, the same thing happened to Jesus. Peter denied him 3 times. One of his most loyal servants denied him 3 times, and granted, realized what a terrible choice that was. But then, in the end, he was beaten and crucified. So the direction that conversation was going with my friend was, Jesus Christ had no easy life, so just because we're dealing with problems doesn't give us any excuse, because Jesus Christ, as a human, not just the Son of God, but even as a human, he was experiencing those problems. So who are we to throw our hands in the air and say, oh, I'm going to go my own way and reject God? So a lot of my, I guess you could say, talks or discussions that I bring up here, I want them to be thinking points that we can think about. Because we've read a lot of the stories in the Bible. We've read probably all of them up here, all of the main ones. And I think it's interesting when you can take the story or the point of the story or the experience from the story and kind of take, not necessarily an alternate viewpoint, but look at it through different lenses. But as I essentially close here this morning, I challenge you guys to be honest with yourselves. And you don't have to necessarily share this with people. You can just write it down or take a note on your phone. Think about instances in your life, and I say be honest with yourself because otherwise the exercise is pointless. Think of where you have searched for false sources of peace, where you have been deceived by peace, what might be peaceful, and think about that experience. And the reason I say think about it is strive to not make that same mistake a second time. This is a silly example, but it's a very real one. Some of you have perhaps driven on my driving simulator I have at my house. And I bought a virtual reality headset for it a few years back. And I remember thinking to myself, man, this is going to be the coolest thing I've ever owned. And it is pretty cool. And Daniel's driven on it, Joseph, the kids, whatever. Even Jenna had a fun time on it one night at the New Year's party. But this was a product that I bought that did teach me a lesson. Yes, it was really, really, really cool. But slowly but surely, I stopped using it as much as I once did. I still bring it out whenever I have people over and such. It's a very cool device for parties and such. But I don't use it nearly as much as I used to. And I thought to myself, man, I saved up for that. I bought it. It was like $300. But that doesn't bring close the satisfaction that it did when I first purchased it. And in the back of my mind, I thought to myself, how long will that take before I think about that with my motorcycle? Well, probably will happen when I crash again in the woods. But seriously, let's not let ourselves be so caught up with something that we're just obsessed with in the moment. And let that be a source that overrules what ultimately should be the peace or the comfort or the reliance that we have in Jesus Christ. So think about those things, write them down, and try not to make the same mistake again. We're all guilty of things. We're not perfect. None of us are. Jesus Christ was the only one that was perfect. So may we take this, and hopefully you guys received some thinking points from it. There, we'll go with that. Take those thinking points and take them into your week. So that's really all I have.